you're actually a bad person, but a bad person is unaware that they're a bad person.
You are the reason why your parents stopped having children.
Your fingers look like hot dogs.
That thing they told you not to worry about is actually the thing you're supposed to be worried about.
It's you. You're the problem. It's you.
You don't even know what's in hot dogs.
You didn't gain COVID weight, you just gained weight.
Oh my God.
Do you even like hot dogs? Everyone else does.
I'm allergic to your bullshit.
You look like you're 100.
I'm so out. Let's go.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we out?
Yeah, we're out.
Peace.
Tapped.
You don't need good advice. You've been ignoring good advice your whole life. Welcome to Shitty Life Advice.
Sad moments. Are you tired of living in compromise? Are you tired of collaboration? Are you tired of equality in your relationships? Well, I was just like you. I remember when I thought relationships were supposed to be a cooperation. I remember when relationships were constant compromise until I discovered this one thing that drastically changed my life. You too could have what I found. This incredible technology I'm about to share with you will bring you closer to people than you would ever want to be to them. Are you tired of feeling compromised? Are you tired of compromise altogether? Are you ready to take charge and be the leader of your life? Well, I was too. I used to think relationships were all about compromise and collaboration and equality until I discovered a technology that would change my life forever. Drama Bond! 2016, Folsom Kink Fair in San Francisco, California. I saw this beautiful wooden X that I could get strapped to, and of course I did. When you see a wooden X with handcuffs attached to it, you strap yourself in, folks. That's just the first rule of life. And I strapped myself in, and then this big, hairy man in leather came up with a whip. Now you might think, gee, Sam, those beautiful features, that nice ski slope nose of yours, you're not made for whipping. And I thought so too, until he started petting my back. He petted ever so softly. And then he got me good. And then he pet me. And then got me again. What I realized in that moment would change my life forever. I realized that You can get away with anything as long as you give back rubs in between. This was the start of my powerful technology, which I have called trauma bonding. If you want the nicest, you gotta create the crisis. You may have heard of trauma bonding as a bad thing. I plan to change your opinion over the next few minutes. Trauma bonding is the #1 force in the world for building strong relationships. I would wake up each morning, I would look myself in the eyes and I would say, "You beautiful sweet thing, you beautiful sweet thing." And then it would begin and I would really let it pour in. "You beautiful, sweet, ugly, unlovable piece of shit, you sweet, lovely, flabby, f***ing shitty." That confusion has led to the greatest relationship with myself ever, as long as you don't count the bad times. Traumatize! Over the next hour, you will learn all my tips and tricks for free, and you can call in. You can be one of the few folks to call in today and to learn a new way to be finally on the winning end of all the exchanges. Are you tired of other people beating the shit out of you? You gotta beat the shit out of them. So call today as we go on the show, 415-799-6653. Imagine what your relationships could be like on trauma. Again, that's 415-799-6653. Hooked on trauma. If you want it to keep, you gotta make it weep. My name is Sam Lamont, and I give a shit. This is shitty life advice. No shit too shitty. No kid gloves or pity. Whatever you want, you get it nitty and gritty. Welcome to shitty life advice. Operators standing by. Hello, and welcome to Shitty Life Advice. My name is Sam Lamont. Hopefully you can hear my voice right now. If not, that's okay too. I'm just going to keep talking while we solve our technical difficulties. So by voice, you can get to know us right now. I am joined with two of my favorite people on planet Earth. Oh, hey, hello, welcome. There I am. Hi, welcome to Shitty Life Advice. A couple of things to know. If the glasses are on, please do not take anything we say seriously. That is the voice of the eternal spirit, Mogazar, the king of, I forgot all his taglines. The awful voice inside your head is basically what Mogazar is. I'm joined by several friends who you can also join by calling in at various segments of the show or participating in whatever way you'd like. We have a tough topic that we have tried very hard to make to bring some levity to, and to also bring some information about trauma bonding, what it is, what it isn't, what shitty thing you should do about it. And I am joined on my right by one of my best friends, Tracy Benjamin.
Hello, trauma.
All right, and I am joined on my left with the amazing trauma doctor, MC McDonald, who's going to do our crash landing about trauma bonds.
Yes. Let's start. Clearly, given the intro, we have a lot of work to do. Let's start with talking about what a trauma bond is not. I see all over social media people describing all manner of things as a trauma bond. Words have meaning and they matter. Things have real definitions, and let's get to it. So a trauma bond is not the intense bond that comes from two soldiers going on the same deployment together. That's just shared experience. It's not the bond that you develop for an abductor. That is Stockholm Syndrome. And it's not a term to explain why you keep having bad relationships. That's a relationship pattern. It may or may not be a trauma bond, but it's important that we know the difference. A trauma bond is the development and course of strong emotional ties where one person intermittently harasses, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. Do you guys want to know the history?
I would love to know the history.
Please tell me.
So the term actually comes from a huge fail in the field of psychology, which is one of my favorite things to talk about when psychology fails.
Huge fail.
Huge fail. In the 1960s, researchers in the United States set out to figure out why it was the case that in the American dream, when people got married and had a white picket fence and a house and all that jazz, sometimes things turned violent. And so they pulled couples who had violence in their relationship, and they pulled the men aside from the women. This is super important. They asked the men what was going on, and the men all said that it was their wives' fault.
Naturally.
Something in their wife was pushing their buttons. And they could say, I've never been violent before. I don't have a rap sheet. I've never been arrested. It's her fault. It's her fault. It's her fault. So they took that data, put it aside, and then they went and they interviewed the women. And the women were uniformly pretty unwilling to talk to the male researchers about the abuse that they were suffering at the hands of their husbands. And so they were a little bit cold, maybe a little bit detached. They didn't have a lot to say. So researchers came back together, again, all male researchers, came back together and decided that what was going on was that there was a personality type that wants to be abused. And so they created the entry in the DSM for masochistic personality disorder, which, spoiler alert, is not a real thing. No one at any point in the course of that research stopped to consider that it was possible that the women didn't want to talk to the male researchers because of their abuse, not that they had the personality type going in. So all the way until the 1980s, the prevailing scientific belief in the field of psychology was that when a relationship became violent, it was because one of the members had masochistic personality disorder. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, you actually feel some of that vibe left over in the zeitgeist.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Where it's like, oh, she keeps going for bad boys.
Yeah.
She must be a glutton.
This is exactly.
Yeah.
Which is really, that's why it's so important that we get these things right and that we talk about the history of the term and what we are sort of inheriting or importing in from the incorrect previous definition.
One of the things we're going to talk about, though, is that phenomenon, right?
Yes.
Like why you keep going for the bad boy kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great.
For
and it's
sure.
not because you're a glutton for pain?
No, not because you're a glutton for pain. Masochistic personality disorder is not real. It was a fabrication by male psychologists who were proven wrong.
Okay, well, to start things off, before we just overwhelm you with information, we are going to do a little quick Q&A. As always, if you follow us on our various Instagram platforms, we generally reach out for questions. Our questions today were sourced from people privately who we knew had something to say on the topic. And we're just going to start. This segment belongs to Tracy. Here we go.
Hello, here we go. I have cards. I stayed until I hated him. Is that a trauma bond?
The first phase is hating them, but the real fun begins when you stay so long you hate yourself. Finish what you've started, and stay so long you hate yourself for staying so long.
Don't be a quitter. All right. Everybody I've dated is a narcissist. Why do I always have a trauma bond?
Highly unlikely that everyone you've dated is a narcissist. Less than 2% of the population has a narcissistic personality disorder, so that's really, really unlikely. What's going on is a relationship pattern that is worth paying attention to, but pathologizing and not actually paying attention to what's going on in the pattern is your way out.
It's 2%?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like it's gone up by a percent.
Yeah. But that, like, that's people who've been diagnosed with it?
Yeah, so there's a huge
probably
difference.
A bunch that are undiagnosed.
Real quick on the personality disorders. Personality disorders are comprised of personality traits. You can have tendencies and traits from a personality disorder without having the full-blown disorder. So we live in a very narcissistic time, and so I think we see the tendencies a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person has a full-blown disorder.
So you can be like diet narcissist, zero sugar, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Saccharine.
Next question.
All right.
Okay. Bing, 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 bing. I'm trauma bonded with my coworker because we had a terrible boss. Is our friendship a trauma bond?
All bonds are trauma bonds if you try hard enough. Learn more at longjohntraumaBondBailBonds.com.
Boop. All right. My siblings lost our parents suddenly. We are trauma bonded, and I can't seem to have a healthy relationship anymore. What do we do?
Okay, a lot there. It sounds like what's going on is that you have some grief in your family that needs to be worked through, and that you have a shared experience, not necessarily a trauma bond. Again, a trauma bond is when you have a development and course of an emotional tie with people where one person intermittently harasses, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. If that's what's going on in your family, then that could potentially be a trauma bond, but it sounds like there's grief and some problematic patterns. It'd be great if you could get a therapist or a mediator in as soon as possible.
Bing. I always fall in love with other addicts in recovery. Is this a trauma bond?
No, you just have low expectations and like cheap dick.
Ooh. It's cheap?
Addicts in recovery are very cheap dates,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Next question. My husband was in control of our finances and put us in a staggering amount of debt. that ruined our lives. I'm so traumatized by this, I don't think I can stay married. Is this a trauma bond?
It could be. Financial abuse is a very real thing, and it happens, unfortunately, very commonly. The best thing for you in this situation is to get yourself to a therapist ASAP who can provide you with ongoing support so you can do the work that you need to do to get out. It's okay, though, that you feel like you need to leave your marriage. I want to normalize that.
Okay. My ex keeps calling me. Are they trauma bonded to me?
You've done so well with no training. You, my friend, are a natural. I like to call that move the good grief, it ain't me, goodbye.
All right. My cat bites me when I am petting her. I love her anyways. Are we trauma bonded?
That's the closest you'll come to getting pussy eaten this year.
Beep, beep, beep.
I can only be friends with other sexual assault survivors. Is that a trauma bond?
Again, this is shared experience. So you're bonding and shared experience. It doesn't necessarily involve a trauma bond. That's a different thing. It's really important that you have friends that are from different walks of life. So I think it's great that you have some friends that have had a shared experience to you, but I would look at, if you can, why you feel hesitant to make friends who haven't had that shared experience.
All right. Why do I cry when I look at pictures of my husband?
You're finally old enough to see how your parents felt when they first saw your husband.
Aww. Bum, 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 bum. Okay. I get triggered every time somebody talks about trauma bonds. Is that a trauma bond?
I would like to refer you to our previous episode on triggers for a definition on triggers, because that is not a trigger, likely. And no, that's not a trauma bond either.
Man, people are getting them wrong. My family only loves me when I am useful. Is that a trauma bond?
Be grateful. Many spend years trying to find their purpose in life, and you're lucky to have discovered that your purpose is the family doormat. Rejoice.
Ding.
That's it for Shit Show. Our next segment, we are actually going to bring on a new friend of mine for our hero complex. Hello, Catherine. Are you there?
Yes. Hi. How are you?
I'm well. I'm going to introduce you real quick. Catherine Keats is a new friend of mine. We met on the internet, and I actually got to see her live show in person in San Francisco last Saturday, but it will be playing every Saturday until April 15th at the Marsh. Is that correct, Catherine?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then we're doing a benefit on June 11th at the Throckmorton for Center for Domestic Peace.
wonderful. So if you're in the Bay Area, please check it out. Catherine, I was blown away at how the Cosmic Muffin brought us together for this timing. And your story is such a beautiful story of taking some really bad cards that were dealt to you and being an alchemist, essentially, and transforming them into something incredible with a piece of art. Could you, for the people that aren't familiar with your story yet, without spoiling the show, of course, tell us a little bit about your story?
Mm-hmm. Well, the show is called The Hummingbird, and it's a beat musical. It's a solo show, and I play 15 characters. And it's about an experience I had in the early 80s. And I went to New York and met and fell in love with my music director, who had suffered from mental illness and became obsessed and thought that I implanted a device in his brain to control him and that I needed to be dismembered. And he held me captive for 54 days, and it culminated in a trial. He came after me, and I ended up in hiding for 20 years with a different identity, with the help of victim witness assistance. And so, of course, I relate to Stockholm very much. And before I came on, you and I were talking about the difference between trauma bonding and Stockholm. And then I was reading about it as well. And I took the story, and I was in show business before, so I had to cut all my ties with my work.
You've lost your whole
Because,
community.
yes,
Yeah.
in my whole career. Yeah. And then after he passed, I could come out of hiding, and I started writing the show at Berkeley Repertory Theater, the ground floor. And then I continued it as a solo show with David Ford at the Marsh.
Can I jump in and
Yes,
ask you a question?
sure.
Well, I'm going to
Yeah.
pull in MC real quick. MC, where is the line between, there's a part in your show that I felt captured something that I know so many people go through, and I know it's dramatized, but I felt like it must have been a summary of a moment that you went through where the doctor is saying, hey, this guy's going to kill you. You need to commit
Yeah.
him. And you are struggling with that choice and decide.
I said no.
You said no.
So I had a mistaken sense of responsibility that I
Yeah.
suffered from terribly. That was historical for me. That was my pattern, when that question that comes up, why didn't you leave? And for me, that's my answer for myself, this mistaken sense of responsibility that I was supposed to be the one to save him. And that, though I hadn't ever and haven't since been in relationships that were violent and controlling like that, I did grow up in a house where that was my pattern, to have this mistaken sense of responsibility that I was the person that was supposed to control everything and my environment. So yeah.
Thank you. So MC, where is the line of trauma bond, Stockholm? How does the spectrum work?
So your situation is quite unique in that sense, where it's likely both. I think when folks are talking on social media about their relationship patterns, much more often what they're talking about is a mistaken sense of responsibility, as you mentioned, which can certainly set the stage for violence, but isn't always necessarily involved. And I think, I want to kind of go back to what you mentioned a minute ago about that mistaken sense of responsibility, that it was your responsibility to save him. Although that is, maladaptive in one sense, it strikes me as such sort of a beautiful adaptation to a horrifying situation, right? So you're in this really difficult to communicate situation with someone. And I think it's really important that we understand that often we internalize the terribleness because it's sort of a way of getting control over a situation that feels totally out of control. So the common thread that I see in just what you've told me of your story and the conversations that I'm having with clients, unfortunately, very often, is that if it's our fault, then we don't have to admit something much more terrifying, which is that this kind of stuff happens in relationship a lot of the time. And that then
Right.
means that our worldview has to shift based on our experience, which is,
Right.
that's a big loss.
Also, one of the tragedies behind this is that generally the people who stay are acting on like what would in almost every other circumstance be a virtue.
Yeah.
Right? Like sticking it out,
Right.
like sticking by somebody. And it's like in this one situation, it's really like, what's that phrase? Like,
A double bind?
no, God, it's like I've lost it. Anyway, where it's like, for trying to do the right thing, like in your heart, especially in Catherine's case, where she's like, struggling with this person who's not well.
Yeah, I think that adds so much complication, because it's very hard to see how corrosive the relationship is when you can explain it via mental illness.
Oh,
Say,
yeah. It was so, plus I was being held, and it's a miracle really that I wasn't killed. But to see someone lose their mind and to feel sympathy and to see an artist that, and you are an artist as well. I mean, it's so complicated. And these kinds of things can happen. Mine, of course, seems to be more exaggerated because of what happened in the case, because the case changed legal precedent in the United States, and there's all these other things that go with it. But no, I wrote the show because I feel like it lets people look in a window where they can see that these relationships are all based on loving. That's how they begin.
Yes.
And, you know, and they are all very individual, and they're not a cookie cutter thing. And there are humans involved, two humans in these kinds of relationships usually, and they become very isolated and very private, and they're very complex. And we must take them into account and treat them as such.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah, and I'm very sensitive to them. And I feel like the fact that I made it out alive, and I have great compassion for my partner who ended up in a mental institution and on the street, and it's horrible what happened to him. And I still feel like I struggle with trauma bond and Stockholm syndrome. And I'm still working through it, you know, because what happened to me was very, very difficult. And, you know, so
one of the
this
most,
vehicle,
I think,
go ahead. Yes.
One of the most profoundly confusing things for the human brain is when you have intermittent abuse. I think sometimes when we think about abuse or violence in a relationship, we think of only the violence, only the abuse. But what people who haven't been through that don't understand is that, as you say, it's mixed with love. And that is profoundly confusing. And so,
what is intermittent abuse? What does that mean?
Abuse that's mixed with. So it's not 100% of the time constant abuse. Right. It's abuse mixed with love or tragedy that makes you feel compassion for the other person. And so it's not just one thing. And so when we stand from the outside,
that is absolutely domestic violence, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
regardless of whether there's a trauma bond going on, absolutely. And it's hard to get out because you're profoundly confused. And when you're confused, there's actually neuroscience here. There's a set of structures in the brain that has been referred to as the mohawk of self-awareness because it runs through the center of your brain, kind of like a mohawk. And when you're in a very confusing situation, those brain structures become disconnected because you've got so much blood flow and circuitry that needs to go to basically dealing with any kind of emergent issue and also just locating yourself in space, orienting yourself. And so over time, it becomes increasingly more difficult to lean on the brain structures that you need to make a decision, to imagine a future without this relationship, and to actually execute on that decision and leave.
And that is the difficulty of being a victim of torture as well.
Exactly.
And that's where Stockholm, right? And that makes it, you know, when I'm speaking to people who are in situations such as mine, that's where I encourage them to reach out to victim witness assistance to get help with therapy and so that they can take a break from working and because it's so important to try and with complex post-traumatic stress disorder because it is so difficult to put things back together. I mean, it takes years and years, and thank God I have art to be able to use as a vehicle for therapy for myself.
That organization has actually helped a really close friend of mine who his mother was murdered violently. And I have heard nothing but good things about them. They helped him get a therapist for free. Wow. So I'm really happy to hear that name pop up again.
Yes.
Before I let you go, Catherine, I really wanted to talk about the transformation process of going from in hiding to literally singing I don't know if you call it Broadway, but literally singing a musical about it in front of a packed house when I was there. And how has that been a part of the healing and rewriting and catharsis for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, writing it was just an incredible experience, you know, and I was working with my music collaborator, Kevin Gersowitz, when we wrote the music together and David Ford, my team. I mean, I felt really safe with them. And I think that it helped bring me out of a particular kind of isolation and to start understanding little by little what happened and why why I couldn't get out of a particular kind of post-traumatic stress, repetitive, episodic thing that kept happening. So it was almost like a creative EMDR, or behavioral experience. So even though it's still very difficult to do the show, because I'm a method actor, so I use sense memory. It's been cathartic to do, but mostly it's been cathartic because I feel like I can be of service. And that has been the most healing part of the journey for me. And being of service to me, and also as a person, not to break my anonymity, but I will, as a person in recovery, being of service is everything. And so writing the show and being of service is really the most important part of my healing journey. And that's how I want to do the show. You know, I want to do the show as service. I want to do it in universities, for the narrative medicine community. I think it's very important that they can look in and see really what happens in relationships, and for, you know, domestic violence. So, and the mental health community. So that's my answer. I mean, it's all about how to be of service in writing. Thank God I have that to be able to do it. And singing, to come back to music. I mean, you know, I was a kid that wanted to do Broadway. That's what I wanted to do.
I'm so grateful I got the opportunity to see your show. I think
my gosh,
MC and I, maybe the three of us, are going to go see it again because
please.
I highly recommend it.
Will you tell us the name of it again?
I will. It's called The Hummingbird. It's playing at the Marsh. But Catherine, will you just do so I felt such a strong connection to you after the show, where I felt like we are clearly going to be in each other's lives. I think you're going to be my voice coach because I want to learn how to sing.
I'd love to.
Could you plug your services and the upcoming shows and benefits coming up?
Yes. So I'm a method acting coach. I coach actors for film and television all over the country and world, and I also coach singers. And the show is The Hummingbird. It's at the Marsh, San Francisco, for the next 3 Saturday nights at 7 p.m. Make sure that you have your parking situation taken care of. There's a parking garage there, very close. And then we are doing a benefit at the Throckmorton Theater in Mill Valley on Sunday, June 11th. At 4 p.m. for the Center for Domestic Peace in Mill Valley, California. And we are looking to tour the show at universities and theaters throughout the country to be of service. And thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sam.
And if we would like to learn more about you and your services and your upcoming shows, is there a website we could follow you at? CatherineKeats.com, or on all social media, you can direct message me. And if you need comps for the show, please reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook, direct message me, and I will make sure you can get in the show for free. Don't even think about it. Just come, let me help you get in. Thank you, Catherine, so much for being part of the show.
Look
forward to hanging out.
Thank you all.
Thank you for your work.
Thanks, everyone. Okay.
All right. Have a good one. Bye. I'm curious from you two, especially you're actively healing grief through your artwork.
Yes.
And you in the work that we've talked about with trauma have talked about narrative and retelling the story a bunch. Let's go, you two. All right.
What would you like to know?
I would like to know how storytelling can help with healing and how your personal experience of creating art around hardship has helped.
Well, art gives me a place to put all my thoughts into. I do a lot of journaling, and what else do I do? I don't know. My mom died about 5 years ago, and after she died, I switched my focus from food, because I'm a food blogger, to time, because how much time do we have left here? My mom's death kind of broke that open for me. So I set out to leave a trail of magic for my family and my son. And my mom, when I was a kid, she knew that I had challenges within our family, and she put me into art therapy. And so after she died, I just went full force into my artwork. And I made this shift from working in food to sharing my art with other people. And I've made worksheets, I've made workbooks, I've made planners, because I feel like it's important to put your energy to good use. My mom taught me that. So I don't know, art is a way that I am productive with my feelings.
What do you think clinically is happening when we do what Catherine did?
So much. And I just want to say, so I have 1,000 thoughts, but I want to say, Tracy, one of the things I really love about your art is that there's this blend of really beautiful expression with organization. And I think what's happening there is that you're mixing these two parts that we typically hold separate and are not necessarily separate. And when we bring them together, what we're doing is engaging circuits in the brain that are healing. And so when you lean into organization and list making and things like that, and especially if you're doing it in a ritual way, you're activating your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain that you need the most when you're feeling really activated or upset by grief. And then you're also allowing the creative expression to come through in a way that's free. And when you tap into that creative expression, you're turning on the hope circuit, which is the part of the brain that we've talked about. I think we talked about last episode. That's really critical in healing. And so there's a lot going on when you're activating those things. You're also completing the stress cycle through expression. And so it's doing so much.
The crazy thing is, the more I practice and the more I work at it, the better my art gets. So I can actually see the improvement happening along the way.
Which is so cool.
How does storytelling, retelling the story, working through the story, how does that help? So if you are coming off of a really bad trauma bond, where you're probably not a great candidate to be dating anyone for a while, but you're trying to work through it, how does that factor into healing?
So much. I think a couple things. And I also want to push back about when you're ready to date in a second. So let me make sure I come back to that.
Okay.
But Catherine's work, when you're repeating the story, you're doing two things. You're occupying the story and giving yourself the opportunity in a safe and contained way to relive it, which helps you move through the things that were too overwhelming in the moment to sit with and move through. So there's that piece. The other thing that you're doing is that when you tell a story, you have to occupy a third person perspective. And what that does for your brain is it creates this shift, this distinction between you in this moment and the thing that happened in the past. That helps your brain label the experience as past, which helps you stop experiencing it as reliving every time you remember it. So when she mentioned EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, I think what she was talking about was this ability to go back into the memory, feel some of the feelings, and then come back out safely. Every time you do that, over time, that's why the word desensitization is in that model, you become more and more desensitized from the memory. Going back to the healing and relationship thing, I think it's really important to understand that we heal in relationship. And so really often I see clients do this thing where they take years and years off of dating to kind of fix the trauma bond. And then they go back into the dating world and everything that they've worked on falls apart because it just gets reactivated again. And so if you feel like you need a time away from, intimate relationships, that's of course up to you. But make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and not trying to figure your stuff out and then go back into the dating world when you've done it, because that also creates this false understanding that there's an arrival point of healing.
Yeah, I think there's times I took myself off the market for the benefit of society.
You should maybe never be on the market.
And that's, oh my God. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, folks. Well, if you have liked what you've heard so far, we have some amazing segments coming up. However, I've noticed that 6 people have liked the episode. We got 20 viewing live, so we could get that up, please. If you're watching, a ton goes into the show. the amount of research that MC has done, the artwork that Amanda and Tracy have done, the clips that get edited to turn into social media by our very own Katie Shell, and the production by Reese. There is so much work that goes into this. It is a labor of love. The best thing you could do for us is to share this show with a friend and to like it, so YouTube sees when people watch the show, they end up liking it and then might give it to some new people. So we have some more minutes. We're going to go to our call-in segment, Phony Friends. We don't have long, but if you would like to join the show, you are more than welcome to. We'd love to hear your questions. Otherwise, we can keep talking about stuff and things.
One little thread that we dropped that I'd like to pick back up is the repetition compulsion. So why do we repeat the pattern? Because that was something that Catherine mentioned in passing, but we didn't dive into, and then you mentioned it here. What's really important to understand, and this is another reason it's critical not to just slap a label on your relationship pattern and then move on, right? It's really, really critical to try to figure out, and this is best done kind of with a therapist or a trusted coach, to figure out what is actually at work in the pattern in your relationship that you find yourself repeating. Because believe it or not, your body is trying to repeat on purpose. And the reason that it's doing that is that your brain is trying to understand and give you an opposite experience to the one that you had that was traumatic. And so it will sort of seek out unconsciously and or sort of create situations that look just like the one that you left for any number of reasons to give you the opportunity to relive it and have a different outcome. If you don't consciously bring that stuff into consciousness and figure out what is the source of the pattern, it will keep repeating. And it's also important to understand that this doesn't just happen in romantic relationships. So if you have a family dynamic, you might repeat this at work. This might happen with friends, with acquaintances, and in your dating life.
One of the things that came up while talking to Catherine is that some of these situations can get so complex, and that can be a way that you isolate. So I've been in relationships that were so complicated, it was very embarrassing to bring a friend in and to say, hey, let me catch you up on what's going on behind closed doors, but here's why it makes sense to me. Like, if you're, I'll speak from personal experience, if I'm locked in a room at nighttime and the person's having a scary episode on the other side of the door and I feel trapped, but like, oh, we have a call.
Saved by the phone. Hello, caller. Welcome to the show. How can we help you?
Hi. Am I live?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Freaking out a little bit, but okay.
Take a deep breath. You're all good.
Do you have a name or alias we could call you by?
So, my name is Samantha. I'm in the chat right now, but
Hey.
I don't necessarily classify this situation as a trauma bond, but it's more like a bond in the midst of trauma. It's not like it's not bonded to the trauma itself. I don't know how, but so my mother, growing up, she had something going on mentally, and I don't know how I would classify it, but she was always a little bit, I don't know, she would come to strange conclusions as well as though she was living in a reality that wasn't quite the same reality that we were all in. And whenever I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I still try to retain our relationship, but I have to distance myself because, I have children now. So whenever she's around, it always kind of comes out, and I can see a lot of the same things that she would say to me. And it's just,
Do you have any examples of that we could help you with?
Oh boy. So okay. So she would claim that the ideas that I had were not from myself, and that other people were kind of implanting these ideas in myself. So if I had a slumber party, she would say, oh, well, maybe they were talking to you in your sleep and trying to get you to act out the next day. Or so she would blame my friends, or it even got to the point where she would blame my father for, behaviors that she saw as not right.
That's so sorry to interrupt you, but I want to validate your experience and to say that what you're describing is delusion. And I don't mean to use that clinical term to scare you, but I think that, often in society and in movies and things like that, when we talk about delusions, we're talking about the most extreme version of a delusion that you can have. But having a belief that doesn't match with reality, you actually said it exactly perfectly, is a delusion. And some people can operate pretty functionally in the world with delusions, and so they don't really get called out. But they can be really corrosive, especially in a parent-child relationship, where you are left trying to figure out like which reality is real and how to relate to her and keep her because she's your primary caregiver. So there's a biological drive to want to keep her in your life, but also to understand that what she's saying doesn't fit with the world.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I also see it impacting her life, and there's this element like that. I feel like she is the one living with the majority of the issue. Like so it's hard for me to claim the trauma because it's mostly affecting her life. I see it corroding her work environments and things like that. So I don't want to be another person that steps out. So I try to stay with her because I know she feels isolated by it.
There's a universal thing going on here too, which is that whenever you're raising a child, you are actively trying to make changes based off of what didn't work with your parents. And so whenever you are with your parents, I mean, maybe this is not a universal, but it's, certainly true for me and most of the people I know. It's very hard when they start behaving in the ways that you're trying to change in the next generation. So that can be incredibly tough in navigating a relationship of how much FaceTime does this person get with my children, and how, can I leave them alone with them? And that's just a really hard aspect of life and raising kids.
I also want to loop back and revalidate and to say that growing up in that situation is traumatic. And your having trauma because of being raised in that situation doesn't mean that your mom's trauma is less or more. We don't need to create a hierarchy for your trauma to be real, but your trauma is real. And I think that. The best way to move forward and have a relationship and figure out where, how much FaceTime this person should have with your kid, just as Sam was mentioning, is to start by accepting that the relationship has been traumatic for you. Because then you can figure out okay, once I accept this, how can I move my boundaries, or what do I need in order to feel safe and have this person around my child?
Right. And back to where your guest was on and you were talking about like feeling somewhat responsible, like how much responsibility should I have in making sure that she receives care? But, I feel guilty that she's gone so long without the attention that she needs to feel right in the world. And I mean,
I think we might have, we may have different opinions on this. I'll start with mine. My opinion is to always protect the most living tissue. So this often comes up with addicts. So a lot of people reach out to me when a child of theirs was, like me, a really bad addict. And it's hard because on one sense, this is the person you love. On the other sense, they are kind of destroying themselves and the family. So I think that it's important to get really clear on where the boundaries are and where you will step in and where you will put an effort and where you won't. And I think, the moment that this starts to take down the rest of the ship is the moment that you need to really get serious about what are your priorities, and there's counteracting forces here. There's the force of wanting to be a good daughter, and there's also the force of wanting to be a good parent. And I think it could be helpful to know where on the list those two things land. What is the absolute priority number one? What is priority number two? So you can manage both, but you'll know when to engage one and not the other. And that's not a choice I can make for you. But does anyone else have?
Yeah, Catherine in the chat said mistaken sense of responsibility, which is exactly where I was going to go with it. I think that for me, I'm a very deeply feeling human. And so when something is sad, especially when it's something that affects someone that I love, I feel responsible for it. Right. And it's taken a long time for me to separate out the sadness from the responsibility. Just because something that happened to my mother was sad doesn't mean that I, as her child, was responsible for healing it. even if I had more capacity than she did, I'm still her child.
Also,
Yeah, it's just hard. It's hard not to mourn like the idea of who she could have been, because aside from that, I think of her as a very capable, intelligent, and a very kind-hearted person, So I have like a loyalty towards her, even, amidst all of that.
I can relate so deeply. That was my whole relationship with my father, was mourning what he could have been with everything that he had at his fingertips and just couldn't manage to do it. And when he died, that was the final, like, oh, I guess we're never going to have that hallmark moment. Tracy, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say to remember that there's only so much that you can do. People change when they want to change. And, it's a lot of effort to try to make that happen for your mom if she's not into it. So don't steal your peace and joy to protect her. Your health and your mental health and your relationship with your child is the most important thing.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Samantha, do you want to stay on while MC goes over her prescription for the day? And that way you can get your personal assignment, which may or may not help you with this process. You want to stick around?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll keep you on the line, and we are going to go to MC's prescription.
Somebody call a doctor.
Okay, so this is exciting news. There's lots of hope here. I know this is a dark subject, but we like to approach the darkness with light. So as I mentioned before, one of the coolest things about your brain is that you have the set of structures that run across the center line of your brain like a mohawk, and we call that the mohawk of self-awareness. When you're in a trauma bond, when you're incredibly overwhelmed, when you have trauma or PTSD, you become disconnected from the structures of your brain that you need to know yourself as a self, to figure out what you like, to make decisions, and to move forward into those decisions. So knowing that is actually really exciting, because even though we are losing our sense of self, once we know that this is what is happening and why, we can reconnect to the mohawk of self-awareness. So there's 3 things that are really critical that I need you to do this week, if this is you. One is to really focus on who in your life you can lean on for safe support. Is there anyone in your life that you can reach out to? We also have a list of resources and recommendations if you don't. And then there's 2 other things. Number 1, this is going to sound very simple, but reconnect with yourself. The best way to do this is in tiny, tiny ways, especially if you're in a really dark spot. It can be really hard to remember who you were before this moment of trauma bond, of overwhelm, of trauma and stress. So if you can take a few minutes, 5 or 15 minutes, and go into your past and think of things that you used to love. And it can be as small as, like, when I was 12, the color purple was like the most exciting thing in the world. And I want you to make a list of those things, because as you do that, you are reconnecting those brain structures in the mohawk of self-awareness. And you're also bringing forward into the front of your mind memories from a more peaceful time. The second tool is to recalibrate your sphere of influence. And so what you do with this tool, and this, the reason I love this is because you can do this from anywhere, anytime, no matter how you are feeling. My favorite place is when I'm lying on the couch and feeling absolutely like paralyzed. You start to think about your sphere of influence. So when you feel paralyzed, you feel like you can't do anything. There's no forward motion that could possibly happen. There's no hope. And so in this space, I want you to make a list of things that you could do in that moment. And I don't mean big, huge life changes. I mean, I could walk across the room and turn down the lights. I could get up and make a cup of tea. I could figure out if I have the stuff in my house that I need to make some cookies. I could text a friend. I could open TikTok. I could open Instagram. I could open YouTube and rewatch all of the Hello Humans episodes of Shitty Life Advice. All of these things that you could do. You don't even have to do them. The act of making the list helps you recalibrate your sphere of influence and tells your brain that even though you feel stuck in this moment, that you actually have more influence than you think.
Wonderful. Can you give us a quick recap? 1, 2, 3, 4. Just high level.
Make sure that you have some people in your life who are there for support. Second thing is reconnect with yourself. Go as tiny as possible. What did you love when you were a kid? And then third, recalibrate your sphere of influence.
Thank you so much. Samantha, are you able to give yourself 10 or 20 minutes to do those things?
Yeah, probably.
I
I don't know that it will, but I hear you, and I just don't know that it's going to happen.
I understand that as well. But if you would love to, please stay connected. Be a part of this. We would love to see you in the chat next week. Hear how it went.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining,
Thank
Samantha.
you so much, Samantha, for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, everybody. Well, that's our episode on trauma bonds. Is there any burning desires from any of you?
Burning desires.
Burning desires. That's it. That's our show. If you like the show, please remember to give us a like. Please share it with your friends. Let them know, hey, this up and coming show, it's pretty funny. Maybe if we support it, it might get better and better. It's possible. Just wanted to thank all of you in watching us live. It's very fun to have a live group of people to talk in front of and get to read the chat as it's happening. And if you're watching on the replay, just send us a comment. We love to read them after the fact. And share the show with a friend. So that's it for this episode of Shitty Life Advice, Trauma Bonds. I hope you have a great day. Sign up for the newsletter, shittylifeadvice.com. And
we also have an Instagram.
We also have an Instagram and TikTok, Shitty Life Advice Show. That's it for now. See you next Tuesday.